All right, confession time here. How many of you have a closet that is full of so much stuff that you're scared to open it because it might fall out on you? Yeah, I'm guilty. It's right behind my bed. Now, how many of you have tried to go through that closet and realize that there was stuff in there that you didn't even know you had anymore? You had forgotten you had it. Now, this is really the hard one. How many of you, in finding the stuff in the closet that you forgot that you had, then could not bear to get rid of that stuff because it was so precious to you that you completely forgot it? Yeah, I'm guilty of this. This is a huge thing in our culture. In North America, the storage industry, this is storage for stuff that no longer fits in our house and we need to pay extra money to store our stuff, is a $52 billion industry that is projected to double in value over the next 10 years. $52 billion to store the stuff that we can't even fit in our houses. But stuff has meaning to us. We assign value to that stuff. Sometimes it's the value of, I might need it someday. How many of you have just like drawers and drawers of stuff that you might need someday and you can't get rid of it because you might need it, but then you never actually use it? We do this. And I feel guilty about it sometimes. So then I go on Netflix and I watch Marie Kondo. And she tells me I need to get rid of my stuff. And the idea is that we should go through and only keep the things that bring us joy. And so I watched an episode of this and I thought, well, maybe I can put this into place in my life. And so clothes, and I don't need all of these clothes, and I'll donate some of that to our monthly clothing drive, and no problem. I can do that. And I'm feeling good about myself because I'm not attached to my stuff. I'm not too materialistic. That's all good. And like electronics, and now, I'm getting this is a bit harder for me. I still have my VHS player. I have not watched a VHS in probably 15 years, but actually I do think I managed to get rid of it in my last purge, but it was hard. I still have some VHS tapes that I hold on to even after I don't have the player anymore. And then it came to books. And she said, you should only have 30 books in your house. And I was like, out of my cold, dead hands. Books, they're my weakness. They're my kryptonite. I love them. They're my friends. I can't give them away. If I liked a book, I can't give it away. That's like selling your friends. Are you crazy? I might read it again someday. And so now I have an apartment that's completely filled with bookcases. And every once in a while, I buy a new book and I don't have space for it on my bookcases, even though they're like double and triple stacked on the bookcases. So I go to my wife and say, we need more bookcases for me to put my books. And she says, we don't need more bookcases. That space is taken up with my yarn. Because my wife is a fabric and knitter and weaver, and that's her thing. And so I'll go around the house and open a drawer and say, I can put books in here, and it will be mysteriously full of material and yarn and craft projects. And I'm just like, so we all have our thing, our stuff. The thing with stuff is that Jesus knew from the very beginning that we get attached to stuff. And eventually, stuff becomes the reason to live. And so as we look at the parables, today we want to look at the parable of the rich fool. This is in Luke 12, 13 to 21. It's in the Sermon of the Mount, but it's the Luke version instead of the more familiar Matthew version. And in it, as Jesus is teaching, someone comes up to Jesus and says, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Nothing can make a family argue more than money. In fact, a large percentage of divorces happen because of arguments over money, and it's not unusual for families after someone dies to split up and stop talking to each other because of disagreements over money. And so this person comes to Jesus and says, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." Hear that again. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. So he was already rich, and then because he was rich, he bought land, and that land made him even richer. And he thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store all my crops." Crops were his stuff. It was his wealth and his money. Now, if you have an abundance here, there are several things you could do. He could have shared it with the workers that were working to collect all of this with him. He could have helped those that were in need. No, what does he say to himself? Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God." See, at the heart of the story is this reality that money cannot be the most important things in life. Stuff can never be the most important thing in life. Why? Because there are things that money cannot buy. Number one, money cannot give your life meaning. You can have everything and still feel empty. As I was preparing for this sermon, I got to watch a number of videos, and I saw interviews with some of the most wealthy and successful people in the world, and all of them told this same story. I thought that when I got to a certain point of my life, I would hit this level of achievement and I would go, now I am happy. If I became famous, if I became successful, when millions of people were calling my name, when I had everything I could want or buy, then, my life would have meaning. And instead, they found themselves feeling empty. The book of Ecclesiastes talks about this. This is not a new phenomenon. It's been going on from the beginning. It says vanity, meaninglessness. Chasing after things has no meaning to it. Money cannot buy you immortality. Now, if you're really wealthy, you might have really good health care, which could keep you alive a couple years more, but guaranteed you're still gonna die. You might die at 100 instead of at 90, but you're still gonna die. And when you die, you cannot take any of your stuff with you. A friend of mine in high school had a poster in his locker that said, "He who dies with the most toys wins." No, he who dies with the most toys is dead. And other people fight over who gets the toys after that. You cannot take any of your material possessions with you into what comes next. They have no value there. So instead, we're called to use them now in ways that impact the future. But there have been many times where rich people have spent a whole life amassing wealth and come to the end of it and realize that all of that wealth did not change the bottom line, that death was going to happen. Number 3, money can't buy you happiness. You can have every material thing in this world, and it will not guarantee your happiness. I grew up at a boarding school where there was a lot of very wealthy people who would send their children to the boarding school, and I was the poor staff kid. And I always felt that kind of lack of they have much nicer stuff than I do. But I remember one person in particular when I was in high school. When they turned 16, they were given a blank check and told to go buy a car. I was so envious of them. They crashed that car within the first month that they had it. They almost died in an accident. Their parents didn't come to see them. They just sent them another check to buy another car. And what that person said was, money does not mean anything to me. I have anything I want, but I feel alone and disconnected, and I am unhappy. And where they found happy was in the Christian community that we built there, and people who cared about them and loved them, and they learned about a God who cared and loved for them, and it transformed their life. They became happy not because of the things they had, but because of this web of relationships around them and a connection to a God who cared. So why does Jesus tell us the story? He's telling us the story because he wants us to understand that our stuff has spiritual importance. Matthew 6:21 says, "Where your treasure is, your heart will be also." We so easily get entangled on this idea of things being important, things being the most important, and believing the lie that things are what will make us happy. And the problem is systemic. This problem is everywhere in our society because our society is actually built on the accumulation of stuff. How do we measure a country's health and well-being? We generally tend to use the gross domestic product. How much stuff did they make and how much stuff did they sell this year? That's how we know it. When we're looking economically, when we look politically, we measure this. And we have to show that we made more stuff and bought more stuff this year than we did last year. And it's never enough to hit a certain level where we say, if you've done this much, you're okay. It's, I have to have more. We have to have done more this year than we did last year. But in order to keep this going, in order to keep things so that we constantly can say that we have more stuff, that our GDP has gone bigger, that means we have to find ways to make people buy more stuff. Now, there was in World War II, there was a very interesting thing that happened. Our whole society had to all come together with a focus of, we had to put all of our resources into winning this war. Many of the men were away at war, so women started working, many of them for the first time in factories. We built all these factories so they could build all the things we needed for war. And then the war ended, and they had all of these factories building stuff that we didn't need anymore. And so they said, we got to do something. So what they did to create jobs and everything like that was they said, we're going to turn those factories so that they will build things for us. So they turned those factories into building things for us, but people had been going throughout the war learning to live on very, very little because there was rationing. So they're like, well, how are we going to sell them stuff when all this time they've been learning to be frugal and we've been telling them they have to, it's really... So then they created this whole advertising industry. And the advertising industry was based on this idea of selling people things they didn't need. So what do you do to sell something that they already have or don't need? Well, you attach value to that. So you don't just buy shoes. You buy shoes that tell everyone that you are adventurous and dedicated and self-made. Because, if I'm wearing Nikes, I'm obviously going out there and running marathons every weekend. Yeah, no. Cars. We don't just sell a car. A car is a sense of freedom and adventure. Because I'm going four-wheeling through the wilderness camping every weekend. That's why I need my giant SUV, yes. And we assign meaning to these things. But we know that people only need so many things. And the majority of people, hopefully in North America, have the things that they need. So we have to come up with new things. Now, as a youth worker, this is something that really concerns me, because we have a generation of people young people who are growing up, and teenagers and young adults are the largest and most important demographic. We really want to sell people to that, because when we get them in those years, they start having disposable income, they have money to spend. And when you get them in those years, then they tend to have brand loyalty to the future. So a huge amount of money is spent getting teenagers to buy stuff. So here's the thing. To make them want that stuff, we have to make them feel bad about who they are right now. And sell them that if they buy this, things will be better. If you wear these clothes, then you'll be popular and people will like you. If you smear this goop on your face, you won't have acne, and then you can have self-confidence. Never mind that if you had self-confidence, you would be okay with your face the way it is. So basically, what we have is a society where if every teenager in America woke up tomorrow with positive self-esteem, feeling good about themselves, our economy would collapse. Do you see how messed up that is? But this is the society we have built because we have said things are the most important measure of who we are. And this goes everywhere. And so then we get into systems that says having more things is important. So even if we can't afford those things, it's better to go into debt so that you can have those things and keep up appearances. We have a society that says if we can't afford things, if they're made justly here in North America paying a living wage, then we'll send it off to another country and pay people not so well so that we can afford to have it here. And so we have things like slave labor that is still happening all around the world right now so that we can have cheap domestic goods in North America. And it gets uncomfortable. I don't like hearing that. I just want to go buy my jeans and not worry about the wage of who in Bangladesh is making those jeans for me. And if I can get them for $10, I'm just really happy about that. I don't want to think where my chocolate is coming from, but chocolate is something that uses a huge amount of slave labor in the Ivory Coast and other areas of Africa. And I just want chocolate. I don't want to think about where the chocolate comes from. So we've created this broken system that feeds into this. The discipline in this that has been held up in Christian history throughout is simplicity. Of realizing that we become too attached to things, and so simplicity doesn't mean just not having anything. It means being thoughtful about the things we have and putting value on all of the things that go into making those things. It means having less, but maybe those fewer things are better crafted. It means caring about where things come from. But it also means knowing that my happiness and my value will never come from what I get. Now, there's some important things when we talk about simplicity that are important. Number one, there is a difference between simplicity and poverty. And there have been times where Christians have ignored poverty because we're saying, well, if they're poor, they're probably better off anyways because things just get in the way. And I'm like, that's great. Go be impoverished. See how you like it. The Bible talks a lot about poverty. It talks about those who use their finances to oppress other people, and it always speaks out in justice and says, God is not okay with you oppressing other people and keeping them in poverty so you can have more. Poverty is destructive, and Scripture calls us to alleviate it. Here is the reality. There is more than enough resources in this world that every person on our planet should be able to have a roof over their head and have food to eat. However, we keep pooling those resources in smaller and smaller places so that it's not shared. This is so complex. There are some of the reasons why poverty continues to be things like war. When we fight each other over status and nationality, it makes it hard to get resources to the people that need it most. But these are things that as Christians, we are called to speak out against, to do something about. When faced with someone who's in poverty, it's inappropriate to tell them to simply be thankful. And this is, as I'm preparing this message, there's a reality in our church, in our partnership with The Journey, where an entire rows of houses are being evicted and have no place to go. And for me to stand up here and just be like, oh, that's okay, you don't need material possessions, would be incredibly insensitive and privileged for me. The reality is, when we are faced with poverty in our community, that's a call for us as believers to say, we will come alongside and we will help you in this situation, not to stand back and spiritualize it. Wealth is a tool that can be used for good and evil, but it can also be very seductive. This is not me coming here to give you a guilt trip over how much money you make. But I'm saying, be aware that the more money you have, it's not the easier it is to give away. What we found is that the more money you have, the harder people tend to hold on to it and focus on how to get more of it. Now, I have been blessed with some mentors in my life who have been really amazing this way. I was working in a previous church, and I had families that were millionaires, and I had no clue they were millionaires because they lived like anyone else in our community. And they said, the fact that I'm a millionaire means I am blessed to be able to help more people. And they lived in a nice house, but not an extravagant house. They drove cars, and they said, God has given me this as a tool so I can help other people. And I looked at that and I said, I think this is what Jesus was talking about. But be aware that this envy thing so easily comes in. They did a study about what people needed to be happy with money. And it was done in the U.S., so the money is a bit different. And they concluded that $70,000 a year is what a household income needed in order to pay their bills, have their house, and, have food and all those things. And that if you made less than that, you were anxious and stressed, and it got in the way of your happiness. So poverty actually blocked happiness. But once they reached that level, and they were able to pay the bills, making more money than that did not make them any more happier. And in fact, the higher it got, the less happy they were. Now, I'm like, $70,000, you're obviously not paying rent in Toronto right now. But that reality is there, that once you have enough, more does not help. The second thing that they found on this was a lot of happiness came on not how much you made, but where you lived. You see, if you lived in a poor neighborhood, but you were the richest person in a poor neighborhood, you tended to be very satisfied with your life. If you made double what that person made, but were the poorest person in a rich neighborhood, you were deeply unsatisfied with your life. Why? Because it's really about envy. It's about looking at other people and wishing you had what they had. Because the problem comes down to two things: greed and envy. Greed is the desire to acquire more or hold on to our comforts even when we know doing so hurts others. And this can happen in all sorts of different ways. We tend to say, oh, greed is horrible. Those billionaires out there hoarding everything. But greed affects me. It affects my economic choices all of the time. It affects me saying, I'm going to buy this product even though I know it's coming from unjust sources because I want it and it's cheaper, rather than paying a wage of someone who made it in a sustainable way. Greed is what keeps us saying we'll keep doing things that we know are hurting the environment, are killing our planet. And I've had conversations with people about this. I'm saying we're living in unsustainable ways. We're creating junk that we don't have place to put. We're leading to global warming with the pollution we're doing. And people say in response, but what about the GDP? If we do this, other countries won't do it, and then we will lose the GDP in our country. And I'm like, it's not about that. If the cost of maintaining my lifestyle is destroying the planet, am I helping anything? What will that do for my children or grandchildren or the next generation? Not that I'm having children. My youth and their children. Envy is the inability to be thankful for what you have because you think having something else will make you happy. Have you ever done that? You're having a bad day, you're feeling kind of crappy, and you go and you buy something and you get that endorphin hit in your brain? I don't even have to leave the house now because I have Amazon that will deliver it right to me. And I'm trying to be conscious about this. I'm trying to work on this. I'm trying to say I have enough. But then I get in a certain, everyone has their kryptonite, their thing. For me, it's games. You see, I love board games. I just went on vacation to the largest board game convention in North America. And I found myself while I was walking through, and there was this board game. Oh, it was a beautiful game. It was $350 for a board game. But it was okay because it was on sale from $500. And so see how much money I'm saving? I'm being responsible here. And I didn't even have to pay for shipping, which was usually another $100 because the game is like this big. Now, there was such a lineup to buy this game. They had to, you couldn't even walk into the booth and get it. They had this like long queue waiting to get in. And so I found myself standing in this queue, justifying to myself why spending $350 on a board game was a rational, reasonable idea. And I was starting to go, maybe not. What is my wife going to say when she sees the bill for this? So I texted my buddy and was like, it's $350 for this game, but it's not $500. That's a good thing, right? And I was hoping he would tell me, yes, go ahead. And then so he was like, you're crazy. What are you doing? And I ended up getting out of the line and not buying it. But it was the seductive idea that this game would make me, how much fun I will have with this game. I can have fun playing any game. I can even have fun playing Monopoly, and it's like the worst board game ever. I don't need to spend $350 to have fun. This is how envy and greed worms our way into our life. And instead, I have to say, I have enough. And instead of looking at my friend who has that game and wishing I had it too, maybe I should go play it with that friend instead of saying I need to buy it for myself. The counter to greed is generosity. When we view material goods not as a right or a status symbol, but as a gift which has been given to us to share with others, it counteracts that competitiveness of I have to have more. The counter to envy is thankfulness. When I look at what I have and say, thank you, God, for what I have, rather than looking at the other person and saying, if only I had that. When I look at the things that I have right now and say, this is good, thank you for this, it counteracts this power of envy that makes me want to have more. And when I am most secure in myself, in knowing I am loved, in connecting with others, then the power of the promise of these things that say, I need more, loses some of its strength. What will this mean? Well, it might mean making some choices about how we spend our money. It might mean paying more for things to make sure that they are well made and fairly sourced in ways that don't hurt our environment or hurt other people in the production of them. That means taking time to actually do your research and understand where things come from. And that gets exhausting after a while. I don't want to think about that. I just want to go into the store and grab the thing and come out. So this takes a bit more discipline to put into our lives and work. It might mean increasing our generosity towards other people. And it might mean advocating in our government for fairer systems of how we treat people and looking after each other, to say having a larger GDP is not the end of the world and the best measure of things. We should be looking at what is fair and just for all people. As we do these things, God will move us into a space of thankfulness and generosity, because stuff is never what it's supposed to be about. Let us pray. Loving God, you are Jehovah Jireh, our provider, who has given us all good things. Help us as a community to stop looking at stuff for the things that truly matter in life. Help us turn with generosity and justice to those that are around us. And help us to be rooted and connected in real relationships, connected to you in ways that matter through eternity. I pray all of this in your name. Amen.